Okay, we want to thank our partners for this. We received funding and support from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, as well as from the National Agricultural Law Center, which receives funding through USDA's National Agricultural Library. And this specific webinar series is supported through our funding from the National Agricultural Law Center. So we thank them for our support, and if you have the opportunity, we would appreciate it if you would let them know that you have received information from this program. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to today's agenda. We will begin with the roundup of developments from the last quarter. Chloe Marie will be providing that information, and I think Brook Duer is going to provide some input as well during this initial section, and then Brook will speak and provide an overview of the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance and the Interstate Milk Shippers Program. So, Chloe, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. So today we will discuss, like Ross said, dairy developments and issues that occurred from October to December last year. And we will mostly address the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board's ongoing saga over the over-order price premium. Also, a recent petition asking the U.S. Department of Ag to amend certain federal milk marketing orders. Also, some newly enacted tax credits in Pennsylvania for new dairy processing facilities, and the statutes of the dispute between the U.S. and Canadian governments over dairy tariff rate quotas, among other things. So indeed, depending on the issue, I may pick Brook's brain, as I believe we could all really benefit from his expertise to further elaborate on certain points. So let's start with our first item. So on October 26, 2022, Pennsylvania State Senators Elder Vogel and Judy Trunk, majority and minority chairs of the Pennsylvania Senate Ag Committee, sent a letter to the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board in which they urged the board to extend beyond December 31st, 2022, the expiration date of the Pennsylvania over-order producer price premium. The over-order premium is legally mandated by the board to supplement the federal order minimum price for milk volumes that are produced, processed, and sold as fluid milk at wholesale within Pennsylvania. So the over-order premium was at that time $1 per hundredweight. And as some of you may recall, the board ordered in September 2022 the December 31st, 2022 expiration date as part of the adjudication of a petition by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to re-examine the over-order premiums design and administration entertained while engaging in the customary administrative hearing process for establishing the level of over-order premium biannually. And in that process, the board historically sets the over-order premium for 6 months period, but this order only carried a 90-day term in an attempt to produce action by the Pennsylvania General Assembly to adopt House Bill 224 before the close of the 2021-2022 legislative session. So House Bill 224 was designed to amend the state's milk marketing law to grant authority to work with the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue and directly collect the functional equivalent of an over-order premium on the volume of fluid milk sold at retail. And according to the state senators, it is imperative that this premium be maintained until further re-examination and consideration may be made during the 2023-2024 legislative session. Ultimately, in response to a petition filed by Pennsylvania State Grange and a hearing held on December 7, 2022, the board ordered on December 14, 2022 that the over-order premium be extended from January 1st, 2023 through June 30, 2023, still at $1 per hundredweight. So Brooke here, could you tell us about the effect this bill would have on the overorder premium, and why is it so important to Senators Vogel and Schwank that the December 31st, 2022 be extended?
Probably a good idea to talk about the second part first, which is why did the senators feel the need to send this letter? And I think the two big reasons probably. One was that in their view, giving the overorder premium only a 3-month life until it may in fact completely go away was not a timeline that they thought was appropriate or perhaps in accordance with the way they were viewing whether there would be legislative action coming up. In other words, I think what the Milk Marketing Board was doing here is essentially saying, well, there's a bill pending and it has to do with or it will impact our ability to transform this overorder premium in the ways that we're thinking might be on the table for discussion. And so therefore, let's force the legislature to do that by giving the overorder premium only a 3-month life until it expires, rather than the usual 6-month. And so I think the response from the legislature was essentially, don't back us into a corner like this. We can't operate on that kind of a schedule. And so to the extent that it was a sort of an attempt to force action on a particular schedule that the legislature wasn't ready to adhere to, that's one of the biggest reasons why they responded. And I think the other reason was that they're still not feeling as if the overorder premium as presently in place is something to be done away with right now. Now, probably a lot of this difference between the legislature and the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board on this issue has to do with the fact that they really have had two separate lives or inquiries going. The Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board has been living with this issue day after day after day for quite a long time, and they know full well the ins and outs and who's on what side of the issue and what the problems are and what solutions can possibly work and what won't work, whereas the legislature is not quite as tied into all of those details, and they're a little bit more cautious about taking action, and they want to have legislative hearings to talk about it, et cetera. Milk Marketing Board sort of feels like they've had lots of hearings and they've had lots of factual records created in front of them about the way the premium works and doesn't work. And so they feel ready to begin this process. The legislature doesn't feel that way, and they want to keep everything a status quo for at least another 6 months. So now where we're at is that essentially the overorder premium is, it's as if nothing really happened in terms of what dairy farmers are getting paid, and the renewal comes up at the end of next June, which is where it would have always been under normal proceedings or normal processes. I think the big change here is that the Milk Marketing Board has said things in the order that first established it for only 90 days, and then in the order that extended it for essentially 90 more back to its normal schedule. They've already said things that they're committed to and that they want to move forward on with regard to reform. Now, just to get to your second part of your question, and this is why I said we're going to spend more time on the first part than the second part in today's webinar, because this is good stuff. This was a very meaty quarter in terms of some of the substantial activity that occurred. The big issue in this bill is, and let's cut right to it in case people are not aware, the biggest issue is that the Milk Marketing Board wishes to try to transform, and others, the Department of Agriculture, for example, and many other advocates in the dairy industry, want to transform the overorder premium instead of being based upon a pass-through that is keyed to the wholesale sales of packaged milk going out to be delivered at some point in the future to retailers. The PMMB and others want to key a state mandated supplement to the federal order that is based upon actual data on retail sales and potentially even the concept of collecting the money and having the state take possession of it and have a distribution system for it that essentially starts at the retail cash register and essentially would be, and it's not a word that anybody likes to use, but a milk tax. And so to the benefit of our dairy producers in the state. So that's what that bill was all about, was to begin to lay that groundwork. The piece that kind of gets missed in some of this is that this bill passing, if it had passed and whatever will be up for consideration in this new legislative term, it doesn't mean that the PMMB is going to do anything, because everything they do is going to be in response to a petition and a series of hearings and the creation of a factual record. So there will be plenty of time for anything that bill would change about state law to actually be implemented. It was just to create the potential for change, not to actually make the changes. So eventually, at some point soon, let's hope, in this legislative sessions that just began on January 1, we will see some bills introduced on reform of the overorder premium, and then we will see what the legislature develops in terms of a factual record, and then go from there and see if there are expansions of the statutory authority. The biggest absence right now is that retailers don't report their milk sales. So we have no idea technically how much retail fluid milk sales there is in Pennsylvania right now. We got to start with that. And then everything kind of flows from there. So we'll just more or less say we have a clean slate now. The legislative session started. Let's see what's introduced, and the Milk Marketing Board, based on what happened last year, certainly will be chomping at the bit to get to work, but it's going to they're going to have to hold on until the legislature catches up. And again, a big if they in fact give the board more statutory authority to gather retail sales data and maybe statutory authority to do something in conjunction with the Department of Revenue to collect I don't want to say milk tax again, because I've said it once and I'm probably going to take it over the head for saying it once, but to collect and distribute a milk tax. So that's what we're looking at here in much more detail. Sorry to take up time, Chloe, but go ahead with your next item.
No, it's very interesting, and obviously we'll make sure to let you know if anything else happened through our Ag Law weekly review. All right, so next item. On October 17, 2022, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Farm Service Agency announced on its webpage the 2023 enrollment period opening for the Dairy Margin Coverage Program. So the Dairy Margin Coverage Program is a voluntary risk management program which pays dairy producers when the difference between the whole milk price and the average feed price drops below a producer's selected dollar amount. And the USDA letter extended the 2023 DMC coverage deadline to January 31st, 2023. So we know this program has become a major tool for dairy farmers for income protection and general risk management. Brook, can you review the recent history of the program in terms of when payments have been triggered by market conditions?
Sure. This program has been in place since 2019, so it's not been around a long time. However, this might be adequately or appropriately described as the piece of dairy income protection in the nature of other types of programs that other commodities have had with regard to income protections or revenue protections. This is the first one for dairy that has been embraced. and that has seemingly worked well and continues to be well thought of and supported. So we had a bunch of unsuccessful type of income protection programs for dairy. This is the one that seems to be catching fire, and a very big success story for USDA. And I believe that the basic design of this program, if I'm not mistaken from my memory here, is that it basically came from American Farm Bureau in consultation with some academics. And so the bottom line is, in 2019, the threshold, that was the time of extremely low milk prices, and these margins were extremely low. And so, and when it goes below $9.50, $9.50 gap, or the margin between feed costs and the all milk price, then there's eligibility for a payout. So the first half of 2019 was paying out fairly steadily up until sort of the end of the year of 2019, and that's when milk prices began to rise, fairly healthy, healthy rise. So through 2020, there was a little bit of there was no payout, no eligibility for payout in January or February, but then March is when things took a very precipitous drop. And this was the whole mess that we went through with the producer price differentials and, lots of problems going on there. And so we had some very rough months in 2020 where there was eligibility for payouts. Then it was a funny year because 2020 had some, then all of a sudden, the margin increased in July and August. And I guess almost for the rest of the year until December. Then 2021 comes around, and that's an abysmal year. And every single month, I think, but one maybe in 2021, there was eligibility for a payment under the DMC program. And then 2022 has nicely been essentially that after 2021 sort of picked up and just rose right above the 950 line at the end of the year. 2022 is very healthy for most of the year. We did go back in August and September, drop in milk prices and increases in feed prices meant that there was eligibility for payment, but now we are back into the area where there is no eligibility for payment, at least for, I think, November and December of 2022. So it's been up and down. This is like a roller coaster ride. But this thing is working, presumably, by all accounts. I'm sure that there are still improvements, but it gives a very solid understanding to a dairy producer what's coming and when they'll be eligible for benefits under the program. And you can purchase different levels. There is a certain basic level that is free for enrolling, actually. The idea USDA wants to promote enrollment, but then there are other levels that you can purchase to guarantee yourself certain margins, and all the way up to the 950. And so I think this has been a success, and it's been beneficial. And so that's kind of the history of what has turned out to be a relatively well-liked program.
All right, thank you. Okay, so on October 27, 2022, the Agricultural Marketing Service with USDA received a petition from the Dairy Cooperative Marketing Association requesting a hearing to amend federal milk marketing orders number 5, 6, and 7. So the proposed amendments would update the cost reimbursement factors in the current transportation credit balancing funds in orders 5 and 7, and add distributing plan delivery credits through a distributing plan delivery credit fund to be established in orders 5, 6, and 7. So these credits would reimburse costs of delivery to distributing plants from in-area farms and year-round supplying farms, which currently are not eligible for reimbursement from the transportation credit balancing funds. So Brook, can you explain exactly what this petition is seeking, and have there been some real-world market changes that prompted this?
Yes, there have been real world market changes. They're kind of long term that have prompted this. And this is the kind of thing that it takes a while sometimes for reform issues to come to the surface in the federal milk marketing order system, even though the market, probably would dictate that maybe they should have acted sooner to do this, or the losses that this is in response to have been going on for a while. Let's just put it that. They aren't recent market changes so much as the long term. And here's what it is, just get right to it. This is about the southeast part of the country, federal orders 5, 6, and 7, where essentially they have, always been, at least in my lifetime, milk deficit areas. In other words, they're not producing enough to, to meet the demand in those parts of the country. And it's just getting worse, and so this is a move to attempt to essentially compensate producers for the fact that their milk has to travel on their dime, whether it's independent or cooperative, to the processing plant, which are getting fewer and farther between in the Southeast. So the transportation costs to remain a dairy farmer and get your milk to the plant in the Southeast is getting more and more expensive for producers. And so in order to meet the market needs of that part of the country, last thing you need is for dairy producers to be folding up shop saying, I can't even afford to, get my milk hauled to the plant anymore because it's the closest thing is 3 states away, or, whoever I'm aligned with. So the bottom line is the two different things. The transportation credit balancing funds, I believe, have to do with, I want to double check that, but those have to do with the milk that is coming from outside the federal order into the federal order, but again, also incurring large transportation costs because they're moving milk from a federal order from an area where the deficit isn't so bad into an area where the deficit is worse. And then the other credit, the distributing plant delivery credits, are for those who are within the federal orders at issue 5, 6, and 7, whose milk is being moved around essentially because of the scarcity of plants and the need to meet the market demand. So this is a pro-producer move to attempt to create a better economic picture for producers whose milk is being utilized in the Southeast, where there simply is not enough processing to meet the market demand, and the producers, and it's needed, and the producers are viewed to be should be compensated for the extra expense of keeping their milk in that region, so to speak, and staying in. So that's essentially what we're talking about. Okay.
All right. So now let's move on to the regional dairy actions and issues. Yes, so the California Dairies, a farmer-owned cooperative, announced the acquisition on November 29, 2022, of full ownership of DairyAmerica, which is a leading supplier of skim milk powder and a federated marketing cooperative association that is co-owned by Cooperative, Agrimark, and dairy manufacturers, OATKA Milk Products, as well as CDI. And in a press release, California Dairies specified that under the new structure, DairyAmerica would continue to market milk powders produced by Agrimark and OATKA Milk Products. So currently, DairyAmerica benefits from direct access to several port cities in the states of New York and California, and distributes and sells skim milk powder to more than 60 countries, those considerably expanding California Dairies' market reach. So CDI reportedly produced approximately 40% of California's milk supply, and the acquisition will be effective on January 1st, 2023. So Brook mergers and acquisitions in the dairy industry are nothing unusual, but what about this is newsworthy?
The biggest part, I suppose, is that California Dairies Inc., CDI, is taking over the entire operation, so to speak, of this DairyAmerica Inc., which was created specifically by groups of co-ops, by multiple co-ops, in order to market their skim powder for export. And I guess you say it as OATCA. OATCA is the name of the funny name of. Okay, so Agrimark and OATCA were the last two, as I understand it, the last two cooperatives that had an ownership that participated in this DairyAmerica Inc., which is a cooperative made up of cooperatives, which is what's called like a federated cooperative. And so this is now leaving California Dairies Inc. essentially running the entire show themselves. That means that other people who were at one time interested in cooperating with them in a joint effort to market powder overseas have other avenues, and they're satisfied. And so now California Dairies Inc. is essentially going to take over this operation of DairyAmerica Inc. Wholly on their own. And their milk supply, as you said, 40% of the entire California milk supply is under their control. So they have the wherewithal to do that. And it probably also tells you that the power of having port cities cannot be overlooked. California's got the port cities, and New York has the port cities, and that's where Agrimark that's where DairyAmerica was essentially running its operations and still will. And so that's such a huge issue. If you're in the middle of Nebraska or Illinois or somewhere, although Illinois has got Great Lakes, but if you don't have access to port cities, then the export market becomes a whole different thing for you. So that it just tells you the power of geography in a lot of ways. When you're talking about the export market, being there on the coast is you're the one in control or best in control anyway. Okay, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, it's a real advantage. All right. So during the summer of 2021, as some of you may recall, French company Danone, owners of the Horizon organic milk brand, did not renew 89 contracts with organic milk producers in the states of Vermont, Maine, New York, and New Hampshire, with a termination date set in August 2022. So the decision sparked regional turmoil and concern among the Northeast dairy community and some state government officials, and led to several initiatives to support the affected farmers, including Organic Valley Cooperative offering 80 Northeast organic dairy farmers new milk contracts. And in the last chapter of this broader story, on September 20, 2022, Organic Valley Cooperative announced the addition of 12 farms to their cooperative after the 12 producers were dropped by Amish Country Farms of Totowa in New Jersey, including Pennsylvania producers. Brook, do we know what prompted this?
We don't know what prompted the Amish Country Farms, which is a small organic label and brand in it's actually got its plant in New Jersey, although sources a lot of Pennsylvania milk. We don't know exactly what downturn they were experiencing that prompted them to essentially cut loose 12 farms. But this is sort of just another example of what's been happening in the organic sector. We know that you read this, and gave us the account of what happened up in New England. So we don't know, that was mostly caused by lack of organic processing plants within an appropriate distance to the producers, that it was cost effective to be hauling the milk all that distance. And I think they were using Horizon was using some New York plants, I believe, for processing. For the most part, organic milk is processed in somebody else's plant, not a plant owned by the actual organic cooperative or there's a dedicated organic processor. It's an organic line in an existing conventional milk processing plant is generally how things go. Now, the same problem that they had in New England, which is that the transportation costs are prohibitive, and again, transportation costs are on the producer, are prohibitive to get your milk to plants that will do the organic processing. Same basic thing it exists for this plant too, and these, and this area of the country, sort of this mid-Atlantic corridor here. So I suspect that it's a similar issue, that they just were not able to make this work with whatever their processing capacities were. So they had to cut these people loose. Luckily, Organic Valley was there to pick them up, and they've certainly done a lot of work in that regard over the last several years, picking up, producers all over. I mean, the lack of organic processing is just another subset of the lack of processing in general in some parts of the country, but organic is sort of unique because of its attributes. And you see that even in the Northeast here, where processing plants are not necessarily as in need as they may be in some other parts like the Southeast, it's still a problem. So that's what this is all about at the end, is lack of organic processing.
All right. Okay, next item. So on November 3rd, 2022, the Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf signed into law House Bill number 1059, so now Act 108, which amends the tax reform code and provides $15 million per year for 8 years in first come, first served tax credits for the operation of new milk processing facilities in Pennsylvania. So to be eligible, the law provides that dairy producers must, among other things, show they made a capital investment of at least $500 million and created 1,200 new jobs and permanent jobs. So the credits may not be applied to receive a refund or carried back or forward, but they may be assigned or sold. And after the facility begins operations, dairy producers may claim the tax credit at the rate of 5 cents per gallon of milk purchased and produced from sources exclusively within Pennsylvania. Brook, same question as the last item. Do we know what prompted this?
In this instance, we do, which is all indications from, although not publicly broadcast in any way, all indications, and most prominently maybe reported by Phil Gruber from Lancaster Farming, is that this was originally drafted and was all about a Fairlife milk plant, which, Fairlife is the milk brand that people may have seen, that's protein fortified and also owned by PepsiCo, I believe, unless I got that wrong. Maybe it's Coca-Cola. In any event, soft drink manufacturer owns Fairlife, and sells Fairlife. And the bottom line is, this was for the enticement of a Fairlife plant in Pennsylvania, which uncertain if that may ever be possible, or whether that essentially has passed. That ship has passed in the night, and they're no longer the target of this, but the legislation was thought to be a good enough idea for any interested processor to put it out there and make it become law. And so that's what they did at the end of the legislative term here. And so obviously it's looking for a big fish, so to speak, trying to catch a big one here, looking for initial capital investment of, $500 million. And it's interesting to understand that the way that this would be paid, that the tax credit would be earned, is essentially on this tiny little 5 cents per gallon of milk purchased and produced from this new processor. That's how they earn the tax credit, is 5 cents on every gallon of milk. So we will see if this is helpful to enticing a new processor. We talked about that a lot here. Pennsylvania is not without its needs for more processors. If we want to keep our dairy industry where it has historically been, which is in the top, let's just say top 10, we used to be top 5 in the country in terms of volume, we need the processors. And so there's no substitute for that. And of course, because the rest of the country is going to these giant mega dairies, which may or may not, in fact, be owned by people that own their own processing plants, such as Walmart, for example, and others who have basically gone completely vertically integrated here. So to keep up, Pennsylvania needs more processing, no question about it, and this is a way to do it.
Thank you, Brook. All right, so now on to our last item for this quarter, and quite an interesting one. So on December 20, 2022, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative announced it is requesting expanded dispute settlement consultations with Canada under the USMCA to address additional aspects of Canada's administration of its dairy tariff rate quotas. So as a reminder, TRQs provide a preferential rate of custom duty applied to a defined quantity of imported products upon application of the importing party. And this latest action supplements the consultation request initiated in May 2022 to address claims that Canada continues to violate the USMCA by favoring dairy processors over other potential importers. And the expanded request challenges Canada's market share allocation of its TRQs among eligible parties. No further information has been disclosed since May 2022 on that request, nor has information been released as how it will be combined with the latest request. Presumably, there would ultimately be one arbitration panel seated to hear the combined grounds for USMCA violations. But previously in 2021, the US successfully challenged Canada's administration of its dairy tariff rates quotas for restricting eligible entities to dairy processors. And in that initial dispute resolution proceedings, an arbitration panel concluded in January 2022 that Canada's restriction of eligibility to only processors violated the USMCA. Following that, Canada implemented one change by adding distributors as eligible parties, but not retailers or other potential importers. And this change remained unsatisfactory to the US, which led to the May 2022 request for new consultations. So at first blush, it doesn't seem like the parties are getting any closer on a shared view of what the USMCA requires of Canada. And Brook, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, just to recap it in a very summary way so people get the sequence, because it's a little, there was USMCA is signed in 2022. I think that was the summer month, somewhere in there. By January of 2021, the incoming administration immediately files a trade dispute over these TRQ allocations, basically saying, oh, well, Canadian processors can import US dairy products or apply for these better tariff rates to import, but not retail, not grocery wholesalers or retailers, et cetera. Which would be the parties who would be interested in importing US dairy because they're getting some kind of a better price. And theoretically, that's why they'd want to import US dairy into Canada, but they weren't making those parties eligible at all. So the US wins that. It goes through and the US wins. What happens? That takes us all the way to 2022, and Canada says, okay, we'll change one word, and they add the word distributor after processor. But they don't add retailers or wholesalers or anybody else in there. And so the US says, no, not acceptable to us. We want to have another consultation over this, and we'll push it to an arbitration panel if we have to, because we don't think that what you did in response to our first victory in arbitration was sufficient and in compliance with the USMCA. And then so that's essentially dispute number 2. And now we have what is kind of like dispute number 2A, because they've taken that May 2022 dispute filing and said, oh, you know what? While we're doing this, we got other grounds to add to this thing. So we have a complaint with your way that you're distributing these preferential dairy or tariffs. You're distributing them by market share. So only the biggest processor or the biggest processors get the most use of them. Well, that's backwards to anyone who wants to use it. It would be, if there was any processor that would want to use them, it would be a smaller guy or a smaller entity. So who had gaining some advantage or getting some market that they might have not otherwise had. So the bottom line is the US basically said, well, if we're going to the mat for a second time, we might as well add all of our grounds in here. So, that's essentially what's going on. So we'll see, we're going to have another, full out, confrontation and arbitration, not public, those proceedings, but you see the end result. We're going to have another one with Canada, and, we'll see if that changes anything. It's quite a sort of a stubborn face-off here. And I don't think the way that Canada responded to the first, if you want to call it, their first defeat, I think probably ratcheted things up a little bit and didn't make people at the U.S. Trade Representative or the dairy industry happy at all. And so that's where we're at.
Right.
Okay.
Good. And on one last note, Brooke, if you want to talk about New Zealand, go ahead.
Yeah.
And just as a time check here, we're at 12:46.
Right, and we're good. We sort of anticipated that this is the way it would go. We had so many good issues. Okay, now let me switch our sharing of screens. Hold on there a second. All right. Now I'm in control of the screen, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and just to put another little twist on this whole thing, not only is Canada getting on the US's trade representative's bad side, they're getting on New Zealand's bad side, because New Zealand has essentially mimicked what the United States filed initially as a alleged violation of their trade agreement with Canada for doing the same thing, allocating their preferred tariff rates to processors only. And again, why would a processor want to import its competition? It's retailers that would want to import US or New Zealand dairy products because they're getting some kind of a better price. So the bottom line is now New Zealand's after Canada for the exact same reason. And we'll see how that one goes. Different trade agreement, of course. That is the I guess it's called we'll call it the Trans-Pacific Partnership rather than the full long name. But the bottom line is, another one to watch. Now let's talk about our other topic, which is 15 minutes. We're now down to 12, but that's okay. This is not a huge topic, but I thought it was worthwhile talking about because of some of its attributes and sort of how it works. Before we do that, I wanted to show you some interesting, here's some milk that I actually saw myself in a store not long ago, which when you talk about all the milk alternatives out there in the world that are being marketed, at least these people are being straightforward with it. What better could you do than to put not milk on your package? Sounds like a reasonable way to label it instead of calling it something milk. And here's a funny cartoon from the New Yorker that is also picking up on all the alternative milks. So you got grass milk. We take fresh mung grass and process it just like Daisy's stomachs, or orange milk. Don't call it juice because it's not, or way beyond milk. It's almost like the not milk. It makes the not as funny once you see something called not milk right on the label, but it's white and it's liquid. So stop asking questions. So, okay, we'll put the humor aside. Here is where the PowerPoints from all of our past dairy quarterlies are located. Here is where you can watch the videos from all of them. I figured I'd put these links right into the presentation. Now I'm going to show you where to get the things that I'm about to talk about. You go to our website and you click on the Dairy Quarterly Legal Webinar Series. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. You go to the research by topic tab, which is up here across the top, the drop-down menu, and then you go to research by topic, you go to agricultural law virtual resource rooms, and then you see right here is the dairy and dairy products law. You click on that and you get a you get a virtual resource room or virtual reading room that is essentially divided into these, and whatever number it is, what is it, 11? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 11 different, 12 different subcategories. The one that you want to click on is dairy production and products regulation, and then you will go to the Interstate Milk Shippers and Pasteurized Milk Ordinance resources. And what you need to know about this is that the United States Public Health Service, which is part of HHS, of which FDA is also a part. So the U.S. Public Health Service and FDA regulate milk processing for shipment across state lines. People always talk about the idea that milk is regulated by the individual states. Well, it isn't really, but the federal government has a very creative and interesting way it does it. The FDA publishes what's called an interstate milk shippers list quarterly that includes all milk shippers who have complied with their own state's milk sanitation authorities, and they've complied with the basic documents that have been approved by FDA to qualify you to be on the interstate milk shipments list. So if you're on this list, you can ship your milk across state lines because you are deemed to have been compliant with a sufficient state regulatory program in your individual state. So that's how essentially the process works. The federal government itself doesn't go in and inspect the plants, for example. The states do it, but the states must adhere to the substantial equivalence of these federal set of documents, which is, here they are, comply with the Grade A Pasteurized Milk Ordinance and the Grade A Condensed and Dry Milk Products and Condensed and Dry Whey document, and then also a document called Methods of Making Sanitation Ratings. So what happens is that the state generates sanitation ratings of their milk industry, of their dairy industry within their state. And as long as they're doing it in accordance with these documents that the FDA accepts, then the FDA accepts the state's essentially the results of the state inspections and says, okay, it's okay for this entity to be selling their milk in interstate commerce. So it's sort of this delegation downward to the states. And of course, that would make some degree of sense because the states are the ones who want to make sure their dairy industry continues to operate. Again, here are some of the key documents with links to them. It's all based upon this collective of the industry and state regulators. It's called the National Conference on Interstate Milk Shipments. And it's essentially, that's a private organization that's made up of the industry, privately employed people, as well as state regulators. And they come up with, and advice from FDA, and they come up with the standards that have to be met. And then the FDA says, we'll accept those. So it's not quite a self-policing. It's sort of a hybrid of self-policing, so to speak. One of the important things to understand about the way this system works is that, again, the quarterly list is who is permitted to sell in interstate commerce. It means that they are in compliance with the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, which is generally incorporated by each state into its state regulations, or some substantial equivalent of that is. And again, the PMO is written by this group of privately employed people as well as state regulators. And it's all based on what's called state rating officers inspections. In Pennsylvania has state rating officers, and most states do. Some places, they are even employed by private entities. But in any event, being delisted off of this list is the functional equivalent of a death sentence for a dairy business. So this is the key document that essentially keeps the lifeblood of the dairy industry running, because if you can't sell in interstate commerce and you can only sell in your state because you've complied with something less than full passage of your ratings inspections, you're in some significant trouble. I mean, there are very few people that can ever survive in the dairy industry by selling intrastate within their own state. Now, the ratings inspections that go on through these state rating officers, they cover the plant as well as all of the milk handling and hauling activities, as well as the individual farms. So that's who's actually inspecting the individual farms. So there's no federal government employees doing this. These are state employees and or some places even privately employed people. Now, Pennsylvania's list, I'm going to show you an excerpt of it just so you see how it looks. Now, this list is the ticket to being able to operate in this country. And one thing is that if the state is not substantially compliant with the PMO, in other words, their state laws, sanitation requirements for operating a milk plant and activities on the farm don't match the PMO, the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, substantially enough for USDA's, for FDA's satisfaction, they could essentially delist an entire state's set of dairy stakeholders. And that is not an idle threat. There was a time when Pennsylvania's milk sanitation regulations were slightly out of step with the PMO, and there was a lot of hubbub over that. That's all been cured by the 2010 complete rewriting of Pennsylvania's milk sanitation regulations. But this is a very significant issue. Show you how these things look. This is an example of Pennsylvania's. I just took a middle page. It's like 7-8 pages long, but you can see, you can see the basic, just some representative names that you know. Here's Rutter's, here's Snyder's, here's Seven Stars, which is in Phoenixville, PA, a small organic processor. Here, down here toward the bottom is Turkey Hill Dairy and Turner's. So product code, anything that just has a 1 means all they do is fluid milk at that particular, and these are milk permit holders under Pennsylvania state system. When they have a long string of numbers, that means they make multiple products at that location. There's 2 ratings that are important. One is the raw milk column, and one is the enforce rating column. They no longer populate these plant ratings because they don't publish the plant ratings or any other handlers ratings, even though the inspections are done. And the bottom line is you got to be over 90 to stay on the list. So you see here's, Snyder's in Pittsburgh was just riding the 90 bump there. So that's a pretty dangerous spot to be in to some degree. These are done.
Just to highlight, if anyone has any questions, please enter those in the Q&A tab.
I do see 3. Is there any, are those questions or that's us? That looks like that's us in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, Brooke, and we're at
just making sure
1 or 2 more minutes.
Yep. All right. So this gives you an example of what this list looks like. This is the goal. This is what enables these entities to continue to operate. And again, if they get an 89 in here, there's some trouble. This is also the process where this is just the product codes. Look at some of these things that FDA regulates. Raw camel milk, cultured camel milk. I think there's buffalo milk in here too. Yeah, raw water buffalo milk. Get all kinds of things, that FDA gets into. Luckily, we don't see those product codes next to any of ours. In any event, this is the plant code system that hopefully you're familiar with if you're attending this webinar, whereby you can tell where milk came from by looking at the actual plastic milk jug and looking at the numbering system. Pennsylvania is plant code 42. Ohio is 39. You see a lot of 39 milk in Pennsylvania. You see a lot of New York milk in Pennsylvania. New York is 36. So you'll see 39, 36, and 40. You might see a little bit of Maryland, 24, but it's mostly those. And then there's a dash, and then there's a number after that that will tell you the exact plant within the state. So that's where that all comes from, is this IMS list. Okay, I am going to wrap up here. Here is some additional information about how you stay in the good graces of the IMS list. We can always talk about that in another time. So thank you very much for paying attention. I just wanted to make sure you had some familiarity with this concept of the IMS list, because it is the way that the milk industry stays in business, so to speak. So there's my contact information. If you have any questions, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating in our program today. Next Friday, we have our Understanding Agricultural Law series, Agricultural Finance. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested. And then in April, we will have our next quarterly dairy legal webinar. So thank you once again.